You and your friend both go out to a fun dinner. You eat the exact same amount, the exact same thing. You drink the same amount of water. You gained 7 pounds. He didn't gain any weight. What's going on? It's not just the weight thing. We're talking about the water retention and the puffiness. The downside is it's not very fun to look in the mirror at this. The good side is, if you're watching this video, you understand what it might be a sign and symptom of. Let's go ahead and dive in. I put a link down below for my recommended probiotic. Now, the reason that I mention this is if we're talking about anything metabolic, glucose metabolism, fatty acid metabolism, the microbiome actually helps regulate this. So the link down below is for Seed, which is a synbiotic, has a prebiotic and a probiotic in one. So it's a capsule inside of a capsule. I don't talk about supplements much. I usually just say food is what you want to go for. But when you're talking about the microbiome, sometimes you need intervention. So that link down below will save you 15% off your entire order through Seed. Definitely, it's literally the only probiotic I would recommend. I haven't talked about other probiotics on this channel in general, because that's the only one that I would recommend. So people that are looking to add that in, trying to kind of change fatty acid metabolism, glucose metabolism, improve the diversity of their gut, that is definitely the one that I would recommend. So that link is down below, 15% off using that link. So the problem is insulin. Insulin is not a bad thing, but when it is chronically elevated, it actually causes us to retain water and salt when it's concentrated together. And a lot of times we will see that manifesting in our face. Now, insulin slows down the release of water that has been concentrated with sodium. Why is this kind of weird to talk about? And why is it sort of like forward thinking with a lot of the world of insulin resistance? Well, because if you just look at basic high glucose symptoms of high glucose, you're gonna have increases in urination, which is the opposite of what I'm talking about, right? Well, when you start looking at the data, when insulin levels are high and glucose levels are high, you actually retain some water, mainly in the face and hands, but will excrete water from the places that you need it the most. So you actually become dehydrated, but with puffiness and water retention in random places, mainly the face. So we've seen this in studies and data where if glucose is high, then it doesn't really affect puffiness. But if insulin is clamped, meaning they clamp it so that it can't lower, it just stays high, then we start seeing this water retention in these weird places. So here's what's going on here. Insulin stimulates sodium reabsorption through what's called the proximal tube. This is an area of the kidney. So when insulin levels are high, you actually start reabsorbing sodium. This isn't like the end of the world. As a matter of fact, on its own, it's not enough to cause a problem. It's only when glucose is also high that it becomes a problem. Why is this so very important? Because high levels of insulin without high glucose are a problem, but not the end of the world. High levels of glucose and high levels of insulin signal a pretty advanced stage level of insulin resistance, walking that line towards prediabetes and ultimately type 2 diabetes. So when you start having this puffiness issue, it's an indicator that you're in a little bit more of an advanced stage and need to take action. Okay, so the studies have demonstrated that we need to have insulin levels high and glucose levels high, probably correlated with what's called the S-GLUT1 transporter. If you're a biochemistry person, you know what that is. Otherwise, I'm just going to leave it right there because it's not super important. It's just a mechanistic thing. Now, we also have what are called epithelial sodium channels. These epithelial sodium channels are sort of like what allow us to absorb sodium ultimately into the interstitial space, ultimately into like where we would normally hold sodium for various reasons. What happens is that insulin stimulates these epithelial sodium channels even more. So the rate at which you are absorbing sodium increases. So when we take the situation again where you and a friend went out to eat and you ate the same high sodium, high carbohydrate meal, well, you having higher levels of insulin are going to absorb more of that sodium and you're going to retain more of it, which is why you gained 7 pounds and he did not. Now, the caveat here is that that alone, like I mentioned, isn't enough to really cause the issue. If you're hyperglycemic and your blood glucose is also high, that increases the epithelial sodium channel stimulation and makes you retain even more water. So it's kind of interesting. If you look at healthy individuals or people that are eating relatively low carb, they like promote lots of salt, eat more salt, eat more salt, eat more salt. And they don't get puffy. Well, that's because their insulin is in check and the salt doesn't cause as much of an issue. When you are unhealthy and have metabolic syndrome, too much salt, operative words, in tandem with carbohydrates. Salt alone is not the problem, but salt with a lot of carbs, that's where it becomes an issue because of these epithelial sodium channels, and of course this overall just hypersensitivity and retention. So what do you do? Bottom line, first of all, if you're going to have carbs, try to reduce the sodium intake with the carbs, and vice versa. If you're going to have salt, try to keep it lower carb because they do work together, right? So if you're having like electrolytes, which I typically recommend when you're exercising and things like that, try not to have them alongside carbohydrates like you'd normally find in like a Gatorade or something. Try to just go for, you know, a little bit of salt, a little bit of potassium, magnesium, simple sort of electrolyte like that. That is a very important thing to remember. And if you're going to have carbs, well, try to have carbs without a bunch of salt. Kind of difficult to do if you're going out to eat. But one thing like sushi, for example, not a lot of salt in sushi. You can have carbs without salt. That's why people a lot of times when they have sushi, they actually don't end up super puffy. It's kind of interesting. But otherwise, the best thing that you can do is move the body. The more that you move the body, the more that you are activating these sodium gated channels and you are allowing for the proper flux of sodium and potassium and you're allowing for the proper sort of distribution and ultimately elimination of this. That's why if you wake up puffy outside of needing to change your lifestyle, getting moving will eliminate that puffiness really quick because it's sort of triggering that resorption to stop and helping the circulation and excretion. I will see you tomorrow.